Hello, everyone. My name is Pian. I'm the founder and CEO of Amotions. Amotions is a platform to help you and your team be more effective, build great relationships, and master soft skills such as leadership skills, emotional intelligence, and more. Today, we are very happy to have Joy Koo here. Joy Koo is an exceptional executive and leadership coach. She has been coaching full-time for almost a decade, and she has been working with global leaders from different tech and other organizations. And we're very happy to have Joy here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Pian. I'm so honored to be here and thrilled to share.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Would you like to add anything to your self-introduction?
Well, I'll just add that I love nature and I bring that into my coaching conversations wherever possible.
That's wonderful. Great. I love nature
Yeah.
too. Thank you. Joy, I think we talk about that one topic you have seen your leaders and customers that you're working with that are solving is managing changes, especially during the pandemic. There are different kind of things that we need to handle. Becoming remote work, now becoming back to hybrid work or in-person work, and childcare responsibilities and health and all kinds of issues. What are the suggestions that you have for people to handle changes?
Yeah, thanks for that powerful question. I just want to name that COVID has had such a big impact, on the world and on us as human beings.
Mhm.
We've had to adapt quite a bit, and it's been very disruptive, on so many levels. So, surveys have shown an increase in the number of adults and children who report symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression,
Mhm.
insomnia, so on and so forth, right? So, I'd say some suggestions are self care is number one. Can't overemphasize that. And really just asking for what you need. What is it that you need at this time? I want to call out William Bridges' work on managing transitions as well. I found that his suggestions on managing transitions can be quite helpful. So he talks about how transitions and changes are in three different zones. One is endings, new beginnings, and in between endings and new beginnings, you have the neutral zone. And I sense that we going through this pandemic right now, we're in this neutral zone, right? Of not quite knowing when the new beginning is going to start. And, so there's all this fogginess about this time, and that can create a lot of anxiety for us human beings. So six tips to get through this is: one is to limit other big changes in your life. Two is to allow this emotional experience to unfold. Really just acknowledge, what is it that you're feeling right now?
Mhm.
Three is to get creative and do something fun for yourself. This is like a really heavy time. So, how can you have a little fun? And fourthly, get some short-term goals so that you can feel anchored. Fifthly, shift your mindset to one that values this in-between space. And lastly, readjust your expectations about the level of productivity. So that is
Mhm.
the six. And I also, I just want to say, be kind to yourself along the way. We don't have to do everything. And with all these changes, there's some things that we still don't have enough information on.
Mhm.
So how can we take good care of ourselves along the way of sitting with this uncertainty?
That's very helpful to hear the six takeaways that people can do um, in taking care of ourselves and like understanding and realizing the feelings, taking pause, I think it's very important. I like the
Yeah.
idea of doing something creative and fun as well.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And the one of the takeaway you mentioned is limiting big changes. I think in some circumstances we can do that personally, like limiting some big changes, like not to suddenly move somewhere or buy a house, that kind of
Mhm.
thing we can handle and control.
Mhm.
But there are things that we cannot control in our lives. For example,
Yes.
if there's a change in like overall company leadership or strategy, what kind of steps do you suggest for individuals or team members to take so that they can manage these changes while continue to deliver results and innovation
Mm.
and not get burnout as well?
Yes. Well, that brings to light, what is it that you can control, right? Like
Mhm,
Stephen Covey's leadership theory on the circles, the three different circles
mm,
in which, there's a circle of concern, right? Like, oh, there's a war going on, or oh, this is going to change that you can't do anything about. And
right,
then there's the circle of influence. What is it that you can help influence? And then there's a circle of control in which like you can only control. So be mindful of like, okay, what is it that I can really do about this situation? Excuse me. And the things that we can do, are to take care of yourself, like to
mm,
breathe and to just know that, okay, I can self-regulate. So that's one thing. Um, and I just want to call out that we are living in this world of what you call VUCA, VUCA, right?
mm,
And that's a leadership theory by Warren Benison and Bert Nanas. And V stands for volatile, U for uncertainty, C for complex, and A for ambiguity. So this is the world that we live in.
mm.
And, the pandemic has just added a whole nother layer of, VUCA on with the existing VUCA, in my opinion. Um, Yeah, the statistics are in terms of um, you know all the stress and the impact it has is people are getting burnout. No doubt about it. And 75% of workers have experienced burnout, with 40% saying that they are experiencing burnout specifically during the pandemic.
Mm,
67% of all workers believe burnout has worsened over the course of the pandemic,
mhm,
and 36% of employees say that their organization isn't doing anything to help with
mm.
this burnout.
Yeah.
So,
And okay. Yeah, I think it's a very good point in terms of knowing that there are things that we can control and regulate ourselves
yeah.
um, and kind of help with coping with some of these. Um, what other resources do you recommend for leaders or for teams to look into if they're like trying to figure out how to handle changes like organizational structure change, high growth teams, um, and and yeah, like resources for particular common challenges that you see.
Yeah, that is a great question. One is to build on your culture,
Mm,
build on the values, and don't forget that human beings are part of your team. So really having a honest conversation about what's working and what's not,
mm,
getting feedback along the way, not just keep going, going, going and forget about people, because without people, you don't have a team.
right.
And do the necessary work to prepare yourself and your organization for the journey.
Mm,
Ask yourself why. What is the North Star? What is it that guides you in your day to day?
Mhm.
um, and communicate and over communicate. Because in these times where you're going so fast, people can't possibly keep up with what's in your head, right?
Mhm.
If you don't, that's what I've seen anyway in a lot of high growth companies. And I had the opportunity to coach a high growth startup last year, and both the CEO, the CTO were completely burned out.
Mhm.
They had a vision, and people were frankly, because of the pandemic, because of how quickly they were growing, they were exhausted.
Mhm.
And so everybody was exhausted, but there was just this drive to keep going. And as a result of not listening to people, they had a big attrition rate.
Mhm.
People started leaving, and then that's what caught their attention. Then they started to get feedback, wanting to hear what people really had to say.
Mhm.
And it was not easy feedback. So, you know, that's a big price to pay when your people leave. So I would say, really just pause and listen
Mhm.
and build on the culture and see what are your values as an organization? Are you embodying those values?
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
that's a very good point on cultures and values and soliciting feedback and how to digest the feedback. Retention is certainly a um, concern for a lot of organizations, and um, as individuals consider different changes and environments. Um, since you mentioned feedback, I'm curious, how would you suggest someone, if someone is a leader, how would you someone to solicitate feedback that people feel safe to give honest
Mm.
feedback, and then reversely, if someone is a leader, how would someone be able to give honest feedback or constructive feedback in the way that is still feeling empathetic to the person listening, so it's not hurting someone's morale and
Mm.
resulting in attrition.
Yeah. I mean, you have to feel safe, right, in order to want to give feedback. So one thing is to consider, keeping it anonymous, getting an outside consultant coach
Mhm.
to help you with that, to get some 360 feedback in which all responses are anonymous,
Yeah.
and to really get the support you need so that you can hear the feedback as a leader.
Mhm.
In terms of, giving constructive feedback and soliciting it, um, of some ideas I have is that one is to ask permission.
Mhm.
Maybe you want to ask permission and find an appropriate time, right? So that it's a time where it's not like someone's feeling really stressed or really triggered and you don't want to ask at that time, and deliver with empathy, because we're all trying to do the best we can in our workplace, right? And so one way in which you can give feedback that can be quite constructive is a model by the Center for Creative Leadership called SBI, and it's situation, observable behaviors, and impact. So, for example, say we're on a call and you are, you don't have your video on, right? So I'm say your manager, and so I in our next one-on-one, I can say, okay, the situation is, yesterday when you were on the Zoom call, you didn't have your video on.
Mhm.
And then that is, what is the observable behavior, right? You didn't have your video. And you don't want to be like, oh, you're trying to hide from me, or you're making, you don't want to make an interpretation
Mhm.
of the situation. Just something very factual. You didn't have your video on. So the impact would be, as a result, I wasn't able to, make a strong connection with you. So keep it actionable, keep it specific.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it's helpful to know the specifics and that somebody has, something to do about it, not just say, oh, yesterday, I just I just didn't see you, or something very general like, oh, good job, for example, right?
Mhm.
No, good job on what? So that's not very useful. You want to like specifically call out, how did you do well, right?
Right.
So I think that can go a long way. Um, the other thing is, I want to call out two resources because I really love the work. One is by Oren J. Sofer, and he wrote a book called Say What You Mean.
Mhm.
And in this book, he integrates three ways. One is mindfulness,
Mhm.
two is embodied practices, because when you're either going to give feedback or receive feedback, it can be quite stressful on
Mhm.
both ends. So you need to come back to your body to remember that you can de-stress and take care of yourself. So
Mhm.
self-regulation. And thirdly is Oren uses the language of collaboration or nonviolent communication, a framework by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. And I love what he has to share in this book. The other is by Kim Scott, and it's called Radical Candor.
Mhm.
And, it's a way in which you can give feedback where you're showing that you care personally and you're challenging directly.
Right.
You're doing both. You're not just like, um, so she talks about it in four quadrants.
Mhm.
Like one quadrant is where you don't care and you just challenge. So that'll be like, she calls it the obnoxious aggression. You're just challenging, you don't care. The
Yeah.
other is that you care, but you don't challenge,
Mm.
so it's not very helpful either. That's called ruinous empathy. And then the other quadrant is like, you don't care and you don't challenge. And so that's kind of like passive aggressive behaviors, right? Or you're just stabbing somebody in the back. Not useful. So, how can you care and challenge? You
Mhm.
can be both.
That's wonderful that you have multiple resources that you have familiarized yourself with and can recommend people with the different frameworks and how to think about it. I like the idea of emphasizing that you do care, and that's why you give feedback, and then making it specific and situational and actionable instead of being generic. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
and any other inspiring quotes or resources that you recommend for people as they experience changes and transitions?
Yes, I have two. One is by Bruce Lee. And he says, be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. The other is by Lao Tzu. He says, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. So I'm just inspired by those two wise human beings.
That's great. They happen to be both Chinese, and I'm Chinese myself. So
Yes.
that's great. I would incorporate different cultures and elements in thinking about this. I know you also do work or coach people in the setting of nature and also creative activities. Anything else
Yes.
there that you want to mention in terms of handling changes?
Yes, I'd love to share this bit of it because nature is very much um, it's so accessible and
Mhm.
it's good medicine. And so some things to be mindful of as you navigate through changes is, as I said, self-care. But I have this acronym, I came up with it myself, call it MEDS, MEDS. M for mindfulness, E for exercise, D for diet,
Mm,
S for sleep. And as you think about self care, nature can really be very helpful because they've done a lot of research now
mm,
on how it actually decreases your cortisol levels, it
mm,
increases focus. You only need 2 hours a week to get this benefit
mm,
of reduced stress, you know, and it helps with ADHD, it helps with stress hormone levels, reduces nervous system arousal, enhances the immune system, improves your mood, reduces anxiety, etc., etc. So I can't emphasize that more. Having been trained as an ecotherapist, I've seen it work for my personal work as well as
mm.
for my clients. Um, so the other thing to be mindful about is ground yourself to some anchors in your life that create some sense of safety and familiarity.
Mhm.
Really, because as you're like, going through so much change, it's helpful to just turn to some things that can ground you. And remember what's important to you in your life in this time of change. And lastly, I'd say, frame your mindset to look at this as part of a journey.
Right.
You don't have to figure it all out today. Why? So,
That's that's a very good point. Life is a journey, and we continue in the journey of growth, just like plants and
mhm,
trees. And yeah, I love nature myself. I think it feels very peaceful when you immerse yourself in a lot of beautiful nature, trees and flowers. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
yes.
We were talking a little bit about our cultural backgrounds, and I know you not only grew up in Malaysia as Chinese Malaysian, you also work with in different countries and Indonesia, for example. Also work with U.S. Embassy and in different regions of the world. Do you have any
Mhm.
thoughts on how nowadays the teams are getting more and more diverse? We have people come from different countries and cultural backgrounds, and we are very likely to work with people located in different countries and regions around the world as well. Do you have suggestions on how someone can collaborate well or lead well in a diverse cultural setting?
Yeah, I would say look for similarities and celebrate our differences.
Hmm.
Really honoring the diversity so there's a sense of belonging, you
Right.
know, and having a really open mind to understand more deeply what these differences are.
Hmm.
Um, get people in the same room, have a open, honest conversation, lead by example, and I'd say use active listening and summarizing so that you can really boost your understanding, restating what somebody told you to confirm this understanding.
Hmm.
And, be clear about what you're solving for, right? Like,
Hmm.
know the North Star once again, and let that be the guide and reason why you're working together
Right.
when you come to this, like, perhaps awkwardness or discomfort with with collaborating together. And
Mhm.
I'll have a story to share. Personally, I had worked with somebody who was from Cameroon, and she would say, "How are you?" And then she'd say, "How are you?" several times in a 45-minute conversation. And at first I thought, I'm feeling quite offended right now. Like, I'm wondering if she did hear what I said when she said, how are you? And I realized that that's part of a culture. That's how they go deeper. So if you keep asking, there might be more and more. And so over time, I realized that, yeah, you know what? I get it. Because it can be like, did she not hear me? Right? But no, she does that to everybody. And it's really like her way,
Yeah,
her culture of like wanting to get deeper. So
that's very interesting. Maybe instead of how are you, there are there are other ways to phrase it. I think that could be someone sometimes in the context of not everyone has English as the native language. It's not my native language either, so it could be
yeah,
it could be a different way of she's wondering like, can you tell me more, or
exactly.
yeah, why you feel that
Exactly.
way. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
that's very good. I like what you said in terms of understanding the differences and appreciating ap- like understanding the similarities and differences and appreciating both of them. Because
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day we're all human and there's some like common uh, goals, as you said, like why you're working together, that there are some common goals or impacts we want to make. Yeah, so that's a very good
Mhm.
point. Um, that's and you also mentioned that like bringing uh, bring people into a room. Now we can't always bring people into a room because
Yeah.
remote or hybrid work settings. What would you suggest in the virtual or hybrid settings that when people can't actually always meet in person?
Yeah, I mean, right, that's been quite the conversation as of late as to how can we still connect, right, in this
Mhm,
virtual environment in a way that will be more supportive. I would highly recommend having a conversation, on the phone, or on Zoom so that you can have a face to face.
mhm,
But now that we're in a hybrid setting, like knowing what kinds of conversations you would prefer to have in person and not
mm,
delay it, right? I think it's really important to be able to get on the same page.
mhm.
Otherwise, this there can be this disconnect, and when disconnect happens, it just doesn't bode well for um, more collaboration and more just I've just seen things happen where it when there are things that aren't spoken but that needs to be spoken, it's time to have that conversation. And how do you have that conversation is really important because you don't want to be, texting
Mm,
something that's emotionally driven.
right.
There's a lot of uh, things that could go wrong there. So
Yeah.
knowing the context,
Mm,
pick up that phone, schedule a Zoom call,
mhm.
you know, and if possible, meet in person.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So texting is not the best, or messaging on messaging apps is not the best way to communicate some important issues and conversation, especially that's related to your heart and how you're feeling. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a very
yeah,
good point.
indeed.
Some of the kind of that kind of conversation I heard is sometimes related to career development. As someone is considering their career, um, they might think about growth, or they might think about like what keeps them challenged and motivated, or they might think about what is next to me, what is next for me, what's gonna look like in the next few years. Um, do you have a sense on in this kind of conversation how could someone first to start the conversation, approach it, and then how would someone from both the, for example, like someone initiating this kind of leader career development conversation, and from the leader standpoint, how would a leader be able to help their team to consider and talk through this kind of career development conversations?
Yeah, no, I really think that is so important to have this conversation because people want to grow, people want to learn, right? So you have to have these conversations. So as a, you know, as a manager, you want to be able to support your person, your team to grow and, really try to like link it to the person's passions, what the person wants to grow more in, and giving them the feedback they need, constructive feedback, as well
Mhm.
as asking for what support that they might need from the manager.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, um, as a team member, I'm responsible for my own growth as
Mhm.
well. It's not just relying on the manager. So being honest with yourself, what is it that I really love doing and I want to do more of? And what is it that are some of my edges that I know I need to grow more into?
Mhm.
Asking for that help from the manager. Um, and the other thing is to consider getting a coach as well, right? Like
Mhm.
as an outside objective opinion,
Mhm.
sometimes that can be very useful to lean on a coach
Mhm.
and get the support you need.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a very good point in terms of understanding what's important for someone, and then what kind of help that the person should get, and or if you're leader helping a team, what kind of help you can provide to that person. And
Hmm.
I heard of uh, giving constructive feedback. It's one of the key elements as well in this area. Um, it sounds like, I mean, for someone to be able to understand what's important for them, and what's crucial, what they want, what kind of goals, there are ways to they could work with the coach on that, or they kind of need to allocate some time to think through these questions, right? When you
Hmm.
coach someone and in this area, what kind of exercise or practices do you recommend them to do to actually be clear about the goals and values and importance?
Yeah, a resource that I use frequently is this book called Designing Your Life.
Mm,
And it's written by two Stanford professors, and it's a fun book.
right.
And it's one that I highly recommend if you are, really wanting a um, fulfilling life where you create for yourself. They also like just came up with they started off with designing your life. Now it's like designing your work. And so I haven't gotten that book yet, but I'm very curious about it. What's fun about that resource is that um, it gets you out of this like X plus Y equals to Z sort of formula, and it gets you to creatively think about what works for you.
Mm,
So I've gotten, some great success stories from some of the clients I've worked with
mm,
in terms of helping them along in creating a more fulfilling life at work.
That's wonderful. How does it work? So
Yeah.
you would recommend a book to a client, and then they take time to read about it, and then you'll talk through things after they read the book.
Yeah, it depends on the client. With creating a life, I've been using the exercises with them as a platform for more discussion, and
Right.
sometimes we get off that track to talk about what's come alive, because in between readings, things happen, and there's people needing a little bit more uncovering
Mm,
behind what's coming up as they journey along, you know, um, what's happening at work, for example, their
mm,
conversations with their manager,
mhm.
etc., etc. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's 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 very good that you kind of work with people going through the exercise and practice. Sounds like you're very well read and you know a lot of the books and resources and methodologies in different areas. Um, we're about reaching time. Is there any final tips or thoughts you would recommend to people either in the area of handling changes or transition or thinking about their career, how to lead better teams and helping their teams grow?
I'd say remembering that we are human beings and
Mm.
not human doings.
That's very, that's very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for the time today, Pian Pian. I'm
Thank you.
honored to have had this chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joy, for sharing all your experiences, wisdoms from both your own experience, but also having worked with so many professionals and leaders in different contexts. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.